You know, Srikant, Pramod, good to be back again. The session we had with Prabal, we were looking for a common ground between the events of the 1980s, Sundarji, and with Mumbai, right? Maximum City. What's the connect? We got one. There is General Bragg lives down the road, right? But for this session on the 1946 Royal Indian Navy mutiny, now the Naval Uprising, you literally don't have to look around because the mutiny stroke naval uprising is all around us. We are literally in the epicenter of events that unfolded 80 years ago. Around this time, just a little before, in the month of February 1946, tectonic events took place here in Mumbai of a kind that we haven't seen. And I think it was overshadowed by the Second World War coming to an end. This thunderous, the fiercest war that humanity has ever fought, atomic bombings. And then here you have, in Mumbai, 1946, a spark is lit, and that spark turns into a wildfire that travels across the Indian subcontinent. And today, I'm privileged to have with me two writers, scholars, historians who have highlighted this, how this spark turned into a forest fire and in a week's time had shaken the very foundations of the British Empire. Pramod, of course, I met while he was researching for the book. Pramod, I won't forget that evening you called me home for a drink. He said, I want to show you something. And he had this box in front of him, that sanduk, and he opens it. And it was full of documents. And this is documents that he had collected over several months, several trips to the UK, and he was like a man possessed. Right? He normally looks like a man possessed, but that evening he was all the more possessed. He said, you have to see this. This is unbelievable. The RIN mutiny and all that. Now, this was about a decade ago, 2016, 17, around that time, right? And it's thanks to books like Pramod's and, of course, Commander Cmde Srikant, which another very respected naval scholar, Cmde Srikant Kesnur, who I've known very briefly for about, 30 years? So, Srikant has followed up this thing. And my biggest thing with it is that for the longest time, the last 80 years, we've never given the RIN mutiny stroke naval uprising its due place in history. That's only begun now. 70 years later, it's only now that the naval leadership has woken up to this, that, hey, listen, this is something that really shook the foundations of the British Empire here, as they were about to leave. But I want to start with you, Pramod, about this book, 1946. It was, what prompted you to, it's the obvious question I know, but I must ask you this. Why did a publisher from one of India's most reputed book publishing firms decide to write this book on 1946? Was this a byproduct of your book on Gandhi?
Yes. Yes, indeed it was. And, it's a rollover from one book to the other. It's a rollover from one book to the other. I've always taken, because I'm not a history scholar, I work hard on it. I research as much as to the best of my ability and produce books which everyone seems to have liked so far. So I was finishing my book on Gandhi, and I wanted it to be a little different. It turned out to be quite different. It was a take on Gandhi as a human being rather than as a Mahatma. And I read almost every 98 volume of collected works of Mahatma Gandhi. It took me about 1 year to read it, but it was speed reading. It wasn't like anything that was not important, I didn't pay attention to it. When I reached volume 96, 97, which dealt with 46 and 47, I came across a letter that the Sardar Patel had written to Gandhiji, saying that I have asked Jawahar not to come to Bombay, yet at the calling of Aruna said this, Aruna, he is coming. Let him come. We'll see what happens. he was apparently very apprehensive about Pandit Nehru's visit to Bombay. So I just sort of read a little further, and that it had something to do with some mutiny which was taking place here. Now that, unfortunately, or for whatever reason, that the mutiny did not find place in my book on Mahatma Gandhi. But when I finished that book, was that was published about 10 years ago, slightly more. When I finished that book, I thought I should have a look at why. I mean, it was a strange letter from
You were a little closer and louder.
Sorry.
This side they're not able to hear. You know, actually when he turns, he should pull. Yeah.
So coming to is this better? Yes. So when I finished this book on Gandhi, I said I should read a little further on what he had written, what Sardar Patel has written, because it's not a usual letter that one leader writes to the other, complaining about someone who is his contemporary and his colleague. So I read a few more of the correspondence, and I realized that he was talking about some mutiny that happened, and hardly anyone had heard about this mutiny, and so I wasn't surprised that I hadn't heard about it. And I started to examine further, probe further, and I went to National Archives. To my great surprise, and you see, one thing the Britishers were very good at, to keep the court records, they always kept it very well. And all the Commission of Inquiry reports, they also kept very well. So I saw some 70 or 80 files of the Court of Inquiry that happened on each ship that was either involved or not even involved in it. And it was extensive, there were, depositions by officers, by Britishers, those who were asked to leave the ship, etc., etc. Now that,
What to tell you now? That is saying she can't hear you.
I'll tell you at home. Anyway, I'll do my best. So, where was I? Yes, so I read those reports and pursued it further. I thought the best, I write for a layman, I don't write for scholars. I in fact consult scholars to write my book. So I thought the best way to write for scholars is to go to newspaper offices and see what I can look for in those 7 days from 18th of February till the 25th of February. And I came to Bombay Chronicle, whatever was left of Bombay Chronicle in Nehru Memorial. Then Free Press Journal, who was very vocal at the time, was a true Indian newspaper. The Times of India, The Statesman, a whole lot of newspapers, and the Nehru Memorial claims to have all the copies from 1910, 1920 onwards. I went there also. Surprisingly, everywhere I found from 18th to the 25th, all newspapers were missing. In every newspaper office, including the Nehru Memorial. And so I was very disappointed, at the same time very intrigued that why should it be missing from only goes to those 7 days of this. Anyway, I started to rebuild from different sources. It's a long story. In fact, I was asked to do a complete chapter, a prologue on how the research took place, and by my editor. And I must say that I enjoy reading that chapter the most, even now.
The writing of the book, which is as interesting as the book itself.
Yes, and I was a bit lucky that I was able to connect with the descendants of those who had actively participated in the uprising. I called it mutiny at that time, out of my ignorance, but I would now call it uprising. And was very lucky to have found first-hand account from some of these people.
Right.
So this is how it all
Yeah,
began.
again, a great story of how one man's curiosity led to this fine book on the last war of independence, as we call it. But we also have another book which is appropriately titled "Dead to Dawn" by a former naval officer, Commander Sharma, and curated by Pramod Kapoor. The book.
If you permit me only 1 minute, I'll say.
Oh, yeah.
There were very few books before I began. Bhabha and you see that book?
Beauty of the
There
Innocents.
was Commander Sharma's book.
Yeah.
And these were 2-3 books that were written by those who were directly connected with the Navy. There were others who were connected, but they were this was largely leftist.
That's
This was a book
That
that
really-
inspired me to come to this in many ways.
so this is you can just tell how negligent we have been about this very important chapter in our history, where you can count all the books that are written on the Naval Uprising on the fingers of one hand. So Srikant, this explain to us your journey of curating this book. This is written by a naval officer who felt very strongly about this naval uprising at a time when the Navy was a little embarrassed about it. I'm not sure if it's the colonial hangover or what it was, but I want you to tell our audience here about this experience, about how the Navy, over the decades, has kind of now come out into the open, acknowledging the role that was played in getting us our freedom.
Thanks. So the Navy's part, that they are slightly separate, we'll do that probably in a subsequent book. But we'll foreground this book because it's kind of interesting journey. Around 2015-16, I was to have done a book on the mutiny or the uprising. So, remember in the morning in Mangesh's session, we talked about the various wars, including what happened in World War II. So one of the most curious factors was how did a navy that had done so splendidly in that war, a small navy, which had done so splendidly in that war, just within a few months, it rose against the British.
So just give us an idea of what the Royal Indian Navy had done during the Second World War.
Yeah, I mean, the Royal Indian Navy during the Second World War, though it had dramatically sort of expanded only during the war years, it had actually seen action right from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, to the Arakan, to the Indian Ocean. I mean, you had a ship like the Bengal, for example, a small ship of a kind of bigger than a minesweeper, but about 1,000-ton ship, which had overcome 2 Japanese raiders that were 10 times her size. And Red Sea landings and all that. People like Karmarkar, they got their first medals. So you're talking of a navy that had just grown up. In fact, Admiral Fitzherbert, the CEC before Godfrey, had said that this is a navy that performed to the highest traditions of the Imperial Navy, meaning the Royal Navy. So, how did a navy that had done so well, despite being hastily cobbled up during the war, so to say, and which was born just 10 years before in 1934, 2nd of October 1934, how did a navy that was just, unlike the army that had already, how did a navy that was so young, which had performed so well, now risen up in arms against the British, and that sort of shook the empire, so to say. So that was my fundamental line of inquiry. And at that time, G.D. Sharma's book, the earlier one, this is the later one, he had published a slim book in 2015, which also Pramod referred to just now. It was one of my go-to books to understand. So then, of course, I got down to studying and do some initial things about the book when I chanced to speak to Pramod Kapoor. And Pramod, with the same excitement that he spoke to you, said that I have got 2 or 3 trunk loads of material.
Showed me just one.
So moment I heard that, my heart sank. I gave up because my heart sank. I said, there is no way I can match up that. He had done half a dozen trips to UK by that time. So I sort of gave up my ambitions to write a book, and in turn got a very treasured friendship, you know. So the book stayed for a while. Now serendipitously, G.D. Sharma's son, Commander Vipin Sharma, came to me a few years later, and he said that, look, my father just completed the book and he passed away during COVID. So this has to be sort of published, put together. Now it was expanded much more. It was much more expanded. So it had to be all put together. So the original skeletal framework was there, but now because we had expanded, it had got a sort of, got a little disorganized. So my key challenge in writing this book, or not writing, curating, that's why I use that word, because it is his work and we have to see that. My key challenge was to stay authentic to his voice, because the temptation to write as if you want to write is very strong. But I had to avoid that. So I had to look at the research, his research, more or less fantastic. A couple of places where it was not, I put a footnote to say that this is not what it bears out, but maybe he has this point of view. But at the same time, I had to make sure that what he was saying and why his perspective is unique, Sandeep, is this. G.D. Sharma joined as a sailor in the Indian Navy just after independence. So this is just in the aftermath. So he was still very colonial influenced, and he says as much. He says our treatment was no great. I mean, not because you had bad bosses, because you were inheriting a tradition. So he joined as a sailor then. He spent almost 13 years in the lower deck that we call it. In 1960, he is commissioned as an officer. And then remarkably, in 1970, he goes to the Directorate of Naval Intelligence. A word you are familiar with. And he spends a phenomenal 17 years in the DNI. From 1970 to 1987, till his retirement, he is in the DNI. He gets a VSM also on the way. Now this is remarkable, and he lets out this little thing saying that when I was in DNI, I came across a lot of these depositions and things like that. And he put all that together because he found other people disinterested. And then he wrote the first book. But in the first book, he had not included many things about the Army, Air Force, and certain things here. So what is there in the second book, I'll come to later. But my idea was, this is a very genuine Navy perspective. It's as close as it can get. And his book is not magisterial like Pramod's. Pramod's has a wider view. This is a more Navy-centric view. And it's fantastic. So I said...
It's a first-person narrative.
First-person narrative. But I said, remain authentic to him and bring out what we might have wanted to say. So that was my challenge.
Absolutely. So these are, two books on the RIN uprising, but told from very different perspectives. As you just heard, one is from the perspective of a writer, a publisher. The other one is from someone who joined the Navy just after the RIN mutiny. But Pramod, again, like I began by saying that how we haven't really paid a lot of attention to the RIN mutiny, the uprising. We've had this conversation about how the British kind of realized that their time was up. When that mutiny spread through all the establishments, there was a danger of the Air Force joining in, the Army joining in, and you're looking at 2 million demobilized soldiers that would take up arms against the British, just as they were planning to leave. Did this RIN uprising actually convince the British to leave earlier than they had planned to?
No doubt about it. Yes, no doubt about it. Because after the book is published, though some of them I found while I was writing, but after the book was published, I came across several letters that the Viceroy from here wrote to the Prime Minister and to King George VI, saying that, look, don't treat it like 1857. We were much stronger then, we had an army of our own. Now I cannot trust the army we have. So the sooner we wrap up, the better it is. There are documentary evidence which I probably will put in the next edition. But surely they were shaken up and they knew their time was numbered, and within 9 months, Mountbatten was asked to come. And let me tell you, we all talk about 80 years of uprising. This actually happened 2 or 3 years before that, right after the Congress leaders were let out after 1942, on the 8th of August 1942, when the Quit India movement was announced. And all of them, Gandhiji and everyone was taken in prison. There was Aruna Safari, Achyut Patwardhan, Jayaprakash Kara. There were some, those were young Turks, they were called. They all went underground. A year later, they were all let out, a year and a half later. When they were let out, what would they do first thing? Is to contact the Navy people. Didn't go to them. They went to Navy people and persuaded them that these were all youngsters of 16 to 23. The ratings who actually rebelled were all 16 to 23. And they started to have meetings with them, the like-minded, like the BC Dutt and Madan Singh and MS Khan, etc. in Rivera, right? That building Rivera, where all the meetings on the second floor took place, where Kusum Nair and P.L. Nair, the two leftists, used to live there, and they used to conduct the meetings every Sunday, and these boys would go and listen to them. Who was attending it? All the IFTA members, like Prithviraj Kapoor, you mentioned, Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, Sahib Ludhianvi, all these people used to go and talk to them. They were all inspired much before all this happened. The Commander King thing that happened on the 8th of February was just a trigger. Before that, on the 6th of December, you have the Navy Day? 1st of December. But I think in those days, it was a few days earlier. Those days were 6th of December, on the Navy Day. They actually painted R.D. Puri, that's R.D. Puri's uncle, and we see that in the night they painted Quit India, or in such the abusive language, right? The Britishers go out. This is all that started with. It was not really, exactly 80 years or 18th of February. In the last,
there was a run up to that. But Pramod, when you was mentioning Rivera, and when I began, I said that look, we're in the epicenter of all of the important events of the RIN mutiny, uprising. So you can run us through this as though you were a tour guide. Tell our audience what were the different locations here, from Marine Drive to Fort, where everything was the planning of the uprising, the mobilization, and finally the uprising itself, and then the retaliation happened. What are the big landmarks here? Because we are in the Maximum City Litfest.
Right, you walked me through all these places, to Castle Barrack and Talwar, which is the transport place now.
Yes.
You walked me through all these places.
10
years ago.
We went together. So, ladies and gentlemen, first, of course, we recognize a very gracious presence of Admiral Swaminathan. Thank you, sir. Yes, like you said, there is actually a kind of still existing physical infrastructure. Though the Talwar, where the mutiny started off, is now the empty pool. The Britishers were smart enough to completely destroy that. But it's still called Talwar Camp, incidentally. And that's where the name derives from.
So that's for the ladies and gentlemen, it's the Badwar Park. It's right next to the Badwar Park.
Yeah. So, but otherwise, if you go down, you go down, because that time Talwar Gate was actually on the Causeway Road. So you have the Sassoon Top, you have entire this road coming all the way. You have the Gateway of India and the Yacht Club.
Where the ships are parked.
Where the ships are parked. And where the guns were pointed by the sailors at imperial symbols. You got the naval dockyard. Those days there was no south breakwater. So many of the ships were at anchorage. You have the naval dockyard. Then you have the Asiatic Society Library. And then, you got the Asiatic Society Library. You got Castle Barracks, Angre. where on the parapet there were pitched battle and all that.
And the bodies of the
Yes.
sailors were lined up there.
And then the communication center just outside that, which was called the largest concern outside of, the Admiralty in UK. Often it would take up when World War II they had a failure. So it was this communication center that would take over. And then you have the current Noorboy building, that was the headquarters of the Royal Indian Navy at that time. There was a Fort Barracks at Balakir, but that's not there now. And then of course you had Rivera, where
That's the building in the corner of Marine Drive.
Marine
You
Drive.
turn from this into.
at that time it was where it ended, Marine Drive. So you had Rivera. Incidentally, I stayed in Rivera some years later, and where both Karmarkar was there and Kusum and P.M. Nair were there. And as you have brought out in your tweet, close by to Rivera is where ultimately Balachan Dutt settled opposite the CCI.
2 buildings away.
Yeah, 2 buildings.
I met him in his house in 1997. I was asked, it was the 50th anniversary of Indian independence. My editor said, go and meet this old man over there in this building. I had no idea who he was. He said, I'm BC Dutt, I'm one of the mutineers of the Royal Indian Navy. And he handed me his phone, and he opened a window into another world, and he told me about this, and he said that, look, we were inspired by the INA, we had no idea about the Indian National Army, and we were outraged with all this thing. So, for my generation, this is a history we never learned.
Absolutely.
It is never in our history books.
And therefore, for the Indian Navy, and remember, on the Navy Day of 2001 with Admiral Pasricha as the CMC, we had the Naval Uprising Memorial come up at the Cook Bridge. So it's all there.
25 years back.
But having said that, Sandeep, I believe we must emphasize one thing. A South Bombay focus to the mutiny or uprising sometimes takes away from the fact that this was actually
This was the epicenter.
whole of Bombay was involved, right from Thane, Andheri, Versova, HMIS Akbar in Thane, Malabar Hill, Mulund, and Kalyan. So you had actually the whole city go up in flames. And remember that the number of people who died in Bombay who came out in support of the protesters, the actual participants, the death was less than 10. But the number of people in Bombay alone, we're talking of conservative figures. Yesterday Pramod and I were discussing. Conservative figures is around 500 who died and about 1500 casualties. These are the reported ones, which means the actual ones may have been more. Just to give you a perspective, this is about the same who died in Jallianwala Bagh. And we remember Jallianwala Bagh, but we don't remember the Naval Uprising.
So, Srikant, I was asking you this earlier about the Navy, how it's come to embrace the uprising now. It's been 25 years.
Yeah.
And you have a memorial, you have, it was part of the Republic Day float as well. So the Navy is now, completely embraced the uprising. But surprisingly, it's not, as you mentioned, it's not a national thing. The city of Mumbai, for instance, doesn't know much about it. It's still seen as a very isolated kind of, Navy incident, not a popular incident. What's the reason for that? Why there's no narrative building there?
The reason, probably I'll have to turn the gaze back to media people like you to understand why, no? But let me, I think the Navy, the way it's sort of, there's no doubt, and that's completely understandable, that just after independence, there was a sense of closing ranks and wanting to forget this episode and move on. So it was not discussed. But I think we started recalibrating our approach fairly soon. One of the earliest things that happened is in 71, they were declared as freedom fighters, so you now started to see them differently. But by 96, 50 years of independence, we actually first time called it the uprising. So you gave it a completely new terminology. Then in 98 or 99, I think, or thereabouts, so 2000, you had 2 yard craft named after Madan Singh and B.C. Dutt. And Madan Singh, the photographs of Madan Singh being here. B.C. Dutt had all met the then Foma, Admiral Verma and all. The photographs of B.C. Dutt and his son Tanay, I think, with Admiral Verma. So then 2001, your uprising memorial came up. So there's been this sort of, and by I think by 2007-8, you had discussions in Maritime History Society, and all that happened. And of course, then you have memorial services at the memorial. But interestingly, and this needs to be told too, the official history of the Navy for that period, under two ensigns, Satyendra Singh, which came out in 1985, he is categorical, and I'm surprised by how categorical he is in castigating the British, in sort of saying that these guys did no wrong, and in quoting various, people who took part. Remember, most of the Navy's leadership, post-independence leadership, whether it was Nanda, Koji, Katari, Karbarkar, all of them, one way or Chatterjee, one way or the other, saw the mutiny up close, So
They were all young
they were all
lieutenants,
young,
sub-lieutenants.
and it helped them because it taught them. They were all very junior then, but it taught them what you should do in a post-independence Navy and how you should not have a repeat of this situation. So I think over a period of time, the Navy's recalibration itself is a very fantastic study. And if you'll permit, I'll quote from one small thing that happened within a few days after independence. You had 4 different personalities in the war, in the uprising. You had Commodore North, who was the second senior most officer of the Royal Indian Navy after independence. But at that time, he was someone who came to quell tempers here. He was well liked, and though there was a lot of anger against him as a Britisher at that time, so he represented the British interest, albeit in a benign way. You had Commander Adhar Chatterjee in Karachi, a kind of amiable, avuncular kind of person trying to put the mutiny down, and this one. Then you had Lieutenant Commander Krishnan in Bombay commanding Shamsher, and that is one ship that did not take part in the mutiny because the moment he heard about it, he smelled trouble and he went away to sea feeling an aircraft crash search. And you had YN Singh in distant Port Blair, young lieutenant who took part, amongst a few officers who took part in the mutiny. Now you had 4 different guys in different places responding to the mutiny different way. But 10 days after independence, these 4 gentlemen get together and prepare the blueprint for the Indian Navy. What we call the Indian Navy's plans, which still hold sacred today for the Indian Navy, was prepared by these 4 gentlemen. So look at how beautifully they got together and sort of gave a healing touch immediately from that time. That's how I see it.
Fascinating story, and like you mentioned, Srikant, the book is full of interesting characters. And Pramod, you've done a lot of work uncovering their histories, including the one of Mr. Puri, Mr. Puri's uncle, Mr. Arun Puri's uncle. He said that, at your book launch, he was talking about how he always heard his uncle talk about these stories. Everybody dismissed it as just, another figment of his imagination. He had no idea that he had a freedom fighter in the house. But there is a very interesting person that you mention in the book, who's completely vanished. No one knows what happened to him. Where is MS Khan? What happened to him?
But if he was in India, I would have found him here, or at least his son here. But unfortunately, he defected. Well, not defected. He went to move to Pakistan, and at that, and he was the president of the Strike Committee. Maran Singh was the vice president, and he was the same voice. Someone who was very well educated, very articulate, and everyone who thought that he would, and he talked very balanced, that we should do. In fact, on the day on the breakwater when they were meeting for the whole night, they cried and they hugged each other, saying that we are going to give up and so on. He was the man who was going from soldier to soldier and explaining to them that this is in our interest. It's not long term. All will be taken care of. None were taken care of. That's a separate story. He went to Pakistan. Now Pakistan, I knew he came from Dausa. I knew exactly the locality he lived in, but I couldn't go at that time. I had not it had become difficult. I wrote to my friends. I said, can you find out? They said, yes, we found the home, but we don't know anything about him. Now, this is a conjecture, I don't know. There was a head of the Pakistan Navy called M.S. Khan.
HMS Chaudhary.
No,
No.
M.S. Khan.
M.S. Khan.
Mohammad Sharif Khan. I contacted his daughter then. I am still in touch with his daughter. And she talks very nicely and everything. But she said, no, my father had nothing to do. He was not from Punjab and he was from, Karachi. This is all. I mean, fair amount of people believe that it's him who deserted the Navy in his original name and came back as the head of Navy. This is what I have no proof to say that, but
What a story! I mean, Prabhu, that's another book right there.
well, I was approached by Dawn to give them everything and say, can you help me further on it, because you know the address of the place where he came from, his wife's name, you know his family. But I thought this was not so I didn't pursue. But I'm quite sure that he was the man who was a real MS Khan.
Sandeep, I just want to add to this, not of course to MS Khan, because Pramod's book leaves you tantalizingly guessing about MS Khan, because he says one guy he couldn't, though he's hazarding that guess. But there's a bigger thing here. One is, of course, there's another small, slim book written by a gentleman called Lieutenant Gogni, a British officer. He has an account of a discussion with MS Khan. They actually go for a drink to the Sailors Institute. It is marvelous because if you listen to what MS Khan is talking, he's speaking with a maturity beyond his age. I mean, his ideas of civil disobedience, his ideas of what constitutes mutiny, he's defending and saying this is not mutiny. They are remarkable. Which brings me to another added point. I think one of the reasons this can make a great OTT or a movie, Prakashji, is this, that this was a fantastic set of characters. All these guys, you have R.D. Puri, who later on goes into a completely different direction. You have B.C. Dutt, who becomes a journalist and advertising professional, works for Limtas, then becomes a kind of champion socialist, and then turns up with Yusuf Mehrali Foundation towards the end. You have Madan Singh, who goes to Ghana, who heads an airline corporation. I mean, you look at Madan Singh's children, they said this man was interested in Western classical music, Beethoven, and I mean, you don't expect a normal naval sailor or air officer to be interested. So this was a kind of very remarkable set of characters. All the people who constituted the leaders of the uprising. So I think in some way that lent it a certain character, and that character also comes through in this book. The character of the people who led them.
Thanks. Thank you.
The B.C. Roy's book was actually written by his younger colleague, Shyam Benegal, whose daughter is sitting right there. And the book was actually written, and Shyam gave me hours of discussion about what kind of character he was and what all he did. But the entire book is so beautifully written. And it's very unlikely that B.C. Dutt would have written that himself. But it was 100% written by Shyam Benegal.
This is a story with so many books yet to be written about it.
Every time you read anything on 1946 uprising, you live it. You actually feel that you are in it. Even this morning, when I thought I was when I'm going to be talking to you, I went with my wife to the transport to Talwar, to INS Angre. Yes, today, this morning, and believe me, the earth beneath my feet was very warm. It was like that.
That's it.
Maybe told that we must wind up.
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes for questions.
5 minutes? Yeah.
Prakash ji has one question there.
Okay, I can just speak from here.
Firstly, totally fascinating. Thank you, Pramod Kesnur, for inviting me to this thing. I came specifically for this session. I was once researching books to write a play on Robert Clive, and I did eventually write it. I called it ironically in Kannada, Namma Robert Clive, our Robert Clive. I said, in that book, in the siege of Arcot, I think the Marathas had put him inside, and there was no food for some time, and the famished Tamil soldiers who were with him said, it's okay if we don't eat because you should win, sir. And they starved themselves and gave him the portions of food that they had got. From that, to do this mutiny, how did this happen? Actually, it is because of that single line that gave me the angle of the play that I had to do. And from that I'm asking, when I heard the story from Pramod Kesnur, I told him, I want to do a play on this because I think OTT, film and all should happen later. What happens in a play is that it lends itself to repeat productions. But a film or an OTT thing freezes it and closes it there, So I want to do a play. I just want to ask you both, Pramod ji and actually all the three of you. What do you think that has made an Indian soldier who's used to abuse, being treated badly, not only sees it as his fate, but also thinks he deserves it? What is it that would have made such a person turn and mass like that and create this revolt, which, as Pramod ji very insightfully said, was not a story that the ruler going and the ruler coming. Neither wanted the story to take root in the Indian imagination. So just if you can throw light on that, it would help me a lot.
Pramod, you want?
First, there is a very beautiful play that Utpal Dutt, Kallol, which we did. My book begins with that, and which was banned, but it ran full house for months. So I think you should. I'm sure you read it, or you should read it. I don't think it was probably just the discipline of the force that made them not rebel in the public. The officers in any case were, apart from Sobhani, who, I don't know, he's from Bombay, his family is from Bombay, and they're textile people. I tried my best, but I couldn't contact them. Apart from Sobhani, and there's a gentleman who wanted to, yeah. I know, also someone who migrated in Pakistan, he became a minister in Sindh. Yes. Apart from them, there was no support really at the time. There were these 500 people who rebelled and who were taken first to Mulund, and then out of that 500, 300 or 250 were taken to Kalyan, which was like a concentration camp. And then at the end of it, I'm sure with the consent of our leaders, they were given one-way ticket, escorted to the railway station, and said, never show your face again in Bombay. In that kind of scenario, it was very difficult for a young Vedi to really come up and do anything more.
So if I can just add, Prakash ji, this book, there's a kind of persistent insistence on what was happening in the Navy. In fact, it brought out 9 mutinies before that. And I think what Commander Cmde Sharma, he's also brought out one fantastic letter. This is not until now not known. There's one Captain Ian Scott's report that he brought out. Ian Scott had come on another ship called the NITA, which came in just before the Glasgow. and he actually saw what was happening there. So that Englishman has written a damning account of his own contemporaries. He said all these guys, officers of the RIN, were absolutely sleeping on their job. They knew what was, and the Britishers suppressed that report, which we got it. So what this book does, Prakash, is if any one of us had any sort of romantic notions about the British Raj, it demolishes it, you know. It's sort of, I think, he cuts through with a scalpel, a wonderful account, and it probably explains why they rose in there.
And very quickly to add to what Srikant said, Prakash, is that, there was this myth that this entire thing was a communist plot to undermine the Indian Navy and, all that. They were communists, but I've seen a report prepared by the Indian Navy a couple of decades ago by the same department that you mentioned, which I shall not mention, which said that this was all because of internal issues. They were treated really badly. It was about working conditions and all of that. So I didn't see a lot of the communist thing, but I see Pramod shaking his head very vehemently. We'll stop. We're completely out of time. Please keep your questions for my panelists after the session. We've been asked to wind up. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for such an engaging discussion. Thank you.